You can also...
Hi, doctor, I got a question again. How about raisins?
How about raisins? Yeah, they still would have resveratrol in them. Yeah, there's no reason to think that they wouldn't. Yep. If you've got the skin on, then that's where the pigment is. That's where the resveratrol hangs out.
And prunes too? Prunes and plums?
I would imagine, yes. I haven't looked that question up exactly. Like, you know, I haven't searched resveratrol content of prunes, but that logic is there, that dark pigment in those skins of those types of fruits typically do. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Sure. One other way you can increase BDNF levels is interesting little herb comes out of Southeast Asia, been used in traditional medicine in India for a long time, called Gotu Kola. I had never heard of this before I started really digging into brain research and brain health, right? But this actually can boost BDNF levels, well known to do that. So again, that would be your research-based dose, 500 milligrams twice a day. This is the brand that I like. Again, Swanson does a great job. Let's talk about sugar for a second. This is kind of public enemy number one as your brain, maybe number two, right? Maybe number one is the saturated fat, the bacon, the McDonald's grease, and maybe this is number two or vice versa. I mean, they're right up there at the top, right? So we know there's nothing good about this for the brain. Can you believe that it actually decreases BDNF levels? It's like, seriously? I mean, as good as BDNF is, as important as it is, right? All the effort you're putting out to get your exercise, you know, eat right, take a supplement and all this stuff. And it's like, oh, your sugar decreases it? Like, come on. That's just, you know, kind of insulting, I would think. So yeah, not positive thing. We know that it can be more addictive than cocaine. We see our picture here. These are some of the so-called reward centers in your brain, dopamine being one of the main transmitters involved in that. And the dopamine centers of the brain light up greatly with cocaine, and they light up even more with sugar. The problem is this also has diminishing effect over time, no different than a drug addiction, right? So at first, oh yeah, all the dopamine's getting released, the center is lighting up, you're feeling pleasurable, but no different than a drug that kind of loses its effect and you have to have more and more. The same exact process is going on with sugar. You have to have more and more to get that same pleasurable effect. And in the end, you end up chasing your tail and the whole circuitry is kind of like dying down because it's being over stimulated essentially. Sugar is inflammatory. I don't know if you knew that, but it's inflammatory. I have patients who come in and they're like, yeah, my back pain, you know, it flares up every time I have sugar. And at first I was not sure if I totally believe them. You know, I was trying to understand that, kind of struggling through that. I'm like, really, you can have sugar and all of a sudden your back will hurt? But for certain patients, there's sensitive inflammation, they can tell, and they'll tell me, yes, absolutely. I feel different and it will flare up my pain. So. Sugar also damages the brain's ability to sense fullness, right? So you have some neural circuitry going on in your brain that's getting feedbacks, getting signals from your stomach, from your intestines about how much food you've eaten and whether it's appropriate to feel full or not, right? Well, the problem is sugar actually damages and dulls some of that circuitry, and so it impairs your ability to feel full, even though you've eaten, you know, a decent and appropriate amount. It's therefore predisposed you to overeat. Okay, so we're wrapping up now. What we're going to do is take a slide or so to just review some of these main points, talk about where to go from here if you still have further interest in these topics, and then answer a few final questions here with our time. All right. So the brain's in a constant state of remodeling, and connections are being strengthened or weakened at all times, right? We have all those nerves reaching out and touching each other, reaching out to make new contact points. You're trying to learn something new. Let's say you learn Spanish, you learn a new word, that's a new connection that was just made in your brain. If you don't repeat that word, that connection is going to be lost soon, right? So what we do on a moment by moment basis, whether for good or bad, is either strengthening or pulling apart and decreasing the connections of nerves in our brain. In other words, our brain is in a constant state of remodeling, and we have the brain that we've created for ourselves over decades, years, and even recent weeks of life. A thought is a thing, and it leaves a physical trace in your brain. Again, think of the example of Alzheimer's. Grandma can't remember your name, although she remembers your face, right? That thought, that memory comes down to a three-dimensional physical structure and connection that has to be present in your brain. If that connection is lost, the thought is lost, right? So this three-dimensional structure, therefore, and what would put that in a healthy condition or an unhealthy condition is therefore the basis of all memory, all learning, all thought in your mind. Your brain and your heart both need adequate blood flow, and your enemy is atherosclerosis. Therefore, strokes and heart attacks are prevented in the same way, right? So everything you knew as healthy for your heart, AKA avoiding diabetes, not having high blood pressure, not smoking, you know, keeping your cholesterol down, getting some exercise, like all of that good stuff, you think of that as heart healthy. I also want you to think of that as brain healthy. You have a heart attack, you can also have a brain attack. These are all the same concepts because this all comes down to blood flow and it all comes down to keeping that 3.5 millimeter carotid artery or coronary artery open, healthy, viable to deliver the oxygen that your heart and that your brain need to keep functioning, right? Foods can either contribute to or reverse atherosclerosis. The good news is atherosclerosis can be reversed. That was a scientific question open for debate for many years. Can it? You know, I mean, if you take this 50-year-old guy who's been eating McDonald's his whole life, can you reverse this disaster of an arterial process that he has going on throughout his whole body? And you can, you actually can. Dr. Ornish was the first one to show this back in the 80s out of San Francisco, and it has been replicated since then. So you can actually reverse atherosclerosis. Certain supplements can boost your brain power. We talked about Ginkgo, Resveratrol, Gotu Kola, for example. And exercise makes you smarter in many dimensions. It does that by delivering blood flow. It does that by boosting BDNF levels. It does that by being a brain game in itself, quote unquote, as far as being a complex neurological task that's engaging many different neural centers of your brain. And finally, get more BDNF in your life. So to speak, right? Very healthy, very important for bathing those nerves, keeping them plump, keeping the connections strong. I'm going to send out, as I said, a summary to all of you about this presentation. Beyond that, I've outlined, actually rather developed a whole series of self-paced online learning modules related to brain health. And what that looks like is every 2 weeks I send you an email, and in that email you have certain key learning points. You have links to relevant videos on YouTube of high quality. You have links to relevant articles, and it kind of all just ties together different components of brain health. When we move, we talk about each different thing. You know, we talk about sugar in more detail. We talk about exercise in more detail. We talk about antioxidants in detail. We talk about neurotransmitters. We talk about mood. We talk about meditation. We talk about controlling anxiety, you know, all these different aspects of brain health every 2 weeks for 6 months. That's a concept. So not only if you want to go beyond just a lecture in our time today, more towards something that's self-paced, something you can explore on your own and get a little more in depth with, again, looking at certain articles on Wikipedia or watching a good video, a good TED Talk, something like that. I've woven it all together, and each one takes about maybe 30 to 40 minutes. So I'll give you more information on that on the email if that's something you want to explore in more detail. Okay, let's take our questions. Sounds good. I'm ready.
Hey, Doc, this is Lynn again. I'm going to be a permanent person in your chats, I think. Excellent presentation, by the way.
Okay, sure.
Myself, for exercise, well, this is what I do. Obviously, I can have my aerobics playing drums and whatnot, but I have a question more on the, I say personal line. Sexual activity with your partner and brain receptors and that, and testosterone levels. How does that affect the brain and the heart per se? Well, the brain more so than anything else. I know we have dopamine levels that are going to go up when you're having something pleasurable, and vice versa. So dopamine levels and testosterone and exercise, okay, how does that all kind of correlate as far as making the brain smarter? Okay, let's put it that way.
Okay. Well, there's a lot you're mentioning in there. So the dopamine has to do with the reward center. It doesn't necessarily have to do with you being smarter. I'll say that in my main point. I'll put an asterisk on that comment. Dopamine to a degree is involved in memory as well, but mainly we're talking about it as a reward center. So anything that stimulates that dopamine produces a pleasurable sensation, but you can also overdo that, right? So if you just think of the concept of, you know, ice cream is great, but if you eat ice cream 3 times a day for a week, you're sick of it, it's not pleasurable anymore. You can take anything and abuse it like that, and it will start to lose its benefit and its effect for you. It doesn't matter whether it's sex, dark chocolate, ice cream, you know, cocaine, meth, whatever. So in that sense, our own, you know, internal cue towards moderation, right? It's somehow we're designed for pleasure, but also for moderation. In fact, the more we can restrain ourselves, the more we can be moderated, the more pleasure we can actually derive neurologically. We're not overworking that system, right? It's like that horse. You don't want to just keep overwhipping that horse. It's not going to run for you anymore. So there's a way that you want to live in moderation for that circuitry to have the most pleasurable life that you can, right? Separately, you're asking a little bit about testosterone and sex and brain health and things. What's interesting about testosterone is extremely important hormone, obviously, but the more I learn about it, the more excited I am because it has effects even for the brain. So for example, for men, getting your testosterone level right is known to help prevent and delay Alzheimer's. It's also known to help boost mood. So testosterone does some healthy things for the heart too as well. It typically creates beneficial changes in your cholesterol levels, and it also helps protect against heart problems. So cholesterol isn't the problem, or rather testosterone is not the problem as far as your heart goes. It's actually the solution. Men who have low levels of testosterone have higher risk of heart attacks and have more severe heart attacks when they do, interestingly enough. So when I work with men on a men's health perspective, we often will check the testosterone levels and take pains to keep them up. Thank you, man.
Good. Well, yeah, with that being said, then go ahead and renew my prescription.
Sounds good. We'll talk about that.
All right. Thank you, Doc.
Sure. I'm going to look at one of the questions here on chat. It says, sugar damages the ability to feel full. That's just temporary, yes? Or is it something that's permanently affected over time while eating sugar? Okay, good question. It's kind of both, right? So that fullness that's dulled and lost there eating sugar is going to extend for, you know, to several hours after you eat it. That will slowly then sort of get restored the next day. But again, if you're overeating sugar on a daily basis, then you're dulling that circuitry enough that it can become its own chronic problem. So it's kind of like your acute problem that if you keep up with it can become your chronic problem, essentially. Okay, good question. Looking at the next chat. Can the brain heal chronic physical illness? I've been hearing a lot about the vagus nerve or something like that can be influenced. A great point. Yes, there's a lot to this. The vagus nerve is extremely important. So the vagus nerve comes out of your brain. And what's interesting is it goes down into the rest of your body and permeates out many places. It goes to your heart, it goes to your intestines, for example. And the vagus nerve mainly carries what we call parasympathetic nerve signals, AKA signals to relax and rest and calm and things like that. So you can think about if you were meditating, okay, or if you were just sitting out looking at something beautiful in nature, listening to Mozart, or even after you ate a nice dessert and you're relaxing on your deck and there's a beautiful sunset or something like that, right? Your vagus nerves being stimulated in that moment, your whole body's in this restful, calm, relaxed state. And you can imagine that that has its health benefits, absolutely, right? Your blood pressure is going down for sure. But beyond that, vagus nerve, they're investigating it with certain diseases. I know they're doing even like vagus nerve stimulators. So they're looking at how we could stimulate this thing electronically, implant a stimulator to increase what they call the vagal tone, which is basically the output of that vagus nerve to fire up more of that restful, meditative, calming side of our nervous system, right? The opposite of that is the stressful side of our nervous system, which is called the sympathetic side, right? And that's your flight or fight phenomenon, so-called. And yeah, that's necessary. Yeah, that's important. There's a role for that, but not all the time, right? And in our lives, we're typically way too sympathetic in our nerve output and not enough parasympathetic, AKA we're way too much in fight or flight mode and not enough in rest, relax, and calm mode, right? For example, if you watch something agitating on TV and you feel yourself getting tense and upset, that's that part of your nervous system getting cranked up. Not a good thing, right? Chronically, it's not good for the brain, it's not good for blood pressure, it's not good for your ulcers. And even stress hormones as they're released in your brain, cortisol, for example, it inhibits learning. So cortisol has a very negative effect on the hippocampus, which is a key area in your brain for learning. This gets into why stress is not good for kids, right? We're trying to send them to school to learn. If they're stressed out about somebody's bullying them, or they're not sure if there's going to be enough food when they get home, or mom and dad might be arguing when they get home, they're stressed all day. That's not a positive learning environment. Their cortisol levels are elevated in their brain. Cortisol goes right to your hippocampus and it inhibits your ability to form new memories. It's well known, unfortunate as well. So that's a little bit about the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic system. Very helpful to build some of that more calming influence into our daily life. Okay, let's see. I don't think I see any other questions.
How about reading, doctor?
Yeah, how about reading? Tell me more. What's your question?
Like regular reading, is that's helpful to the brain and it prevents Alzheimer or anything like that?
Yes, very helpful. Absolutely. Your brain loves words. Just put it that way. Your brain loves words, right? Therefore, keeping your brain alive, feeding it with words, let's just think of it in that concept. You're feeding it with words is very important. Let's say I were to learn a new word. Let's say I'll use a different language because that brings it out a little bit more. Let's say I'm learning Spanish and I learn the word adios, right? Adios, that means goodbye. Well, in order for me to learn adios, a couple of healthy things had to happen in my brain, right? First of all, I have the English concept of the word goodbye, and then I connect that concept, goodbye, to the word adios. Okay, but adios is the concept, but then that's also, it's spelled a certain way, right? So when I hear that word and I think about it, I can also see it spelled A-D-I-O-S, right? So now another part of my brain has the visual imprint of what this word is. And another part of my brain has to tell my mouth how to move and even my nose and my palate how to move to create the sound, adios, right? So if I want to say goodbye, now I have the concept of goodbye, I have the word, the visual center that creates the word, and the motor skills to run a pattern that actually causes this thing to come out of my mouth. And that's just learning one word. Right. So similar concept, even as you're learning words in English, you know, you're learning distinctions, right? Like the distinction between sympathy and empathy, right? Or guilt and shame, right? Jealousy, envy, right? Those are different words. They're related, but they're different. And what is the difference exactly? So when you start to hone in your vocabulary, you start to learn new words, you start to become more nuanced in your understanding of words. Your brain loves all that. New parts are talking to other parts, new connections are being made and strengthened. So very, very helpful concept.
Doug, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm curious. I was really interested in the question earlier about the vagus nerve.
Okay.
And I just recently heard somebody talking about how your brain actually extends. I think that's probably one of the ways that they're talking about. Your brain actually extends all the way down into your heart.
Yes.
And I actually am a cardiac patient. I've had some open heart surgeries, and I've heard that that you're just recently this last week somebody said, oh well, your brain is actually connected. Like actually they're kind of like not as separate as we may have thought. You know what I mean? I guess the whole body's like that to some extent, but.
Right.
Anyway, I just it really made me think because everyone that I know, everybody I know that's got the zipper, it's like open heart surgery, and it's not just a actual like they opened you up, but it's almost like it feels like in a way psychologically or emotionally or some other way like deeper connected. And so I was just wondering if that's what you know about that connection, if there's anything to be said for that.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for it, and I don't know all of that, and a lot of it's still coming out, you know, and I'm eager to explore that more myself. I mean, some of the traditional connections that were known are, for example, the vagus nerve, right? So we put our brain in a pleasurable state with some cheesecake and a nice glass of wine and some nice music by the fire with Sweetheart, right? And, you know, our heart's calm and our blood pressure's down, and you know, that's all good too. Or the opposite's true. Let's say we rev our heart. Let's say we're running up some stairs, right? Or an alarm goes off or something, right? Our heart's all revved up. All of a sudden, we also feel the emotional state then of tension, right? It's not like our body gets tense, but we don't have the emotional state to go with it. We do. So if we induce tension in our body, instantaneously, we also induce the emotional state of tension or anxiety, perhaps even fear, something like that, right? So there's two-way communication there, certainly. And we're finding out that there's more and more communication between the brain and the heart, kind of like what you're saying. I have a friend who's a cardiac surgeon in Southern California, and I asked him about this. I started reading a little bit about it. There were these reports of people who would have heart transplants, and all of a sudden their personality would change. Have you heard of that? So
I haven't heard of that, but I wouldn't doubt it at one bit.
Yeah.
Just even having mine tinkered with a little work under the hood on me made me a different man. So I can imagine getting a whole one from somebody else must really be something.
Yes, yes. There are these case reports written up in medical journals, you know, so-and-so have a heart transplant, and all of a sudden, like, he pops out and he's so nice and calm, and like he likes, you know, Beethoven, and he's interested in like French culture and all this stuff. And before, you know, that was nobody of who he was at all, right? This is well known. Many of these examples have been written up, so we don't still understand all that. And I'm sure the concept of memory is important too, right? So I was telling you, as far as your brain goes, all those memories are connections between nerves in your brain. That's true, right? We think of Alzheimer's, okay, no doubt. But memories are also stored elsewhere in our body. For example, I'll have people I work with who are massage therapists, and I've seen this in physical therapy as well. Sometimes as you're working on someone, you're not even talking to them. They might just be getting a massage, right? And all of a sudden, an emotional reaction will happen that's intense. Like typically the person will be crying, right? And you'll be giving them this massage and loosening up their shoulder, whatever, and they're just in tears. And sometimes they can't even tell you why, right? But in the end, it turned out that they were getting bullied in school, and this is the shoulder they fell on way back then. And you sort of touched that area and moved it in a certain way, and it kind of like unlocked and healed the problem, or at least stirred up the problem on some level. And there's a subconscious thing going in their mind, and then all of a sudden maybe it hits their conscious mind, like, oh, I realize or recognize that, right? But this is well known. Body workers will all tell you about this. They'll be working on people, and all of a sudden strong emotions, either positive or negative, will start to come out. And it's kind of like you're discovering it or unwinding it, or addressing it somehow. So we all store memories in our body too. It's not just in the conscious part of our brain. It's definitely in our unconscious, and it's definitely stored in our bodies too. And I wouldn't be surprised if, for example, the heart, you know, on some level is storing memories of things from the past, you know, who knows? It could be.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for weighing in on that. I appreciate it. I wouldn't doubt that one bit either. I'm curious about that. It sounds, you know, the term broken heart, you know, like,
yeah,
it's like physical, you know, like you can feel it, you know, when someone's broken hearted. It's just like, it's mental, it's physical, it's all that. And from actually having gone through a little, you know, actual physical, like real heartbreak and the metaphorical heartbreak of, you know, through a divorce in my life, I must say that you're absolutely right. That exercise and, you know, getting out in the sun, all that really has been helpful to me over the years. And, you know, they talk about PTSD. I've heard some crazy stuff about the EMDR. So now I'm really interested in that whole thing.
Yes.
And I just had this epiphany. I like to fish on my boat a lot. And I was rocking back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it just so happens that I got my boat 3 days before I had an aortic dissection, almost 20 years ago now. And I spent the first year recovering from that before getting my life back together and actually getting back to work, rocking back and forth and back and forth. And it just occurred to me just about a month ago while I was out there on the boat that maybe I've been giving myself EMDR therapy and I didn't even know it this whole time, with the back and forth out there figuring out what was next in life after having open heart surgery at age 31. So anyways, I don't mean to take up your time here, but I really appreciate you weighing in on that. Thank you, doctor.
Yeah, sure. You're right. EMDR, there's a lot to it. I have a strong interest in it. I'm a proponent of it. I don't practice it, but I'm aware of it. I've seen a lot of benefit from it. So I'd encourage you to explore that. Also, the concept of dying of a broken heart is a physical thing, by the way. It's a medical diagnosis. It's a medical concept at this point. And I remember about 10 years ago, I was reading about it. They kind of like figured out, determined, you know, a little bit of what was going on. We had the cultural concept of he died of a broken heart, but then they looked into that a little bit more. And yeah, there are stress hormone levels that change. Your heart actually, the cardiac electrical rhythms become a little dysregulated. Your heart dilates to a degree. Like a bunch of physical changes are noted to those people in that time, which then predisposed to sudden cardiac death. Yeah, so there's the physical underlying principles of dying of a broken heart now are fairly well understood. And I haven't read about it in a while, but it's fruitful to perhaps even catch up on that a little bit more, but it's a concept. You're right. Mm-hmm. Going back to the chat here, someone threw up, and we'll just take maybe one or two more questions, then we'll shut down. But somebody said, does fasting help the brain at all? It does. Fasting is a great concept that helps many parts of the body. So yes, it does. It's known. I remember anecdotally, I first kind of heard about this from the book Unbroken, which also became a movie. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, but it's fascinating. To me, it's the most inspiring book I've ever read in my life. Page turner, couldn't put it down. Completely inspiring, like, you know, makes you want to change your life and stuff. But it's called Unbroken, and it's the guy who lived longest on a raft in the middle of the ocean than anybody else in history. Okay, and that's just one part of his story, but he was a World War II bomber pilot, got shot down. He's out on a raft in the ocean, survives longer than anybody ever has. Then he's taken as a prisoner of war by the Japanese. Bunch of stuff happens to him. But anyway, in this book, he talked about as he was starving, you know, forced fast over these first few days, he started to feel really mentally clear. And so did his partners who were initially alive with him on this raft. And he said the one guy was like giving long speeches and discourses and recalling like foreign languages and just all this. We got mentally sharp as we stopped eating there for the first few days, right? And so a lot of that idea is, I think that when you're eating, it's diverting blood flow. Obviously, I think there's some inflammation that's going on, and I'm not sure exactly all the reasons for that, but you do start to feel mentally clear. As long as your blood sugar doesn't dip so low, right, where you're feeling just sluggish and off, but you do kind of like hit a phase where there's a sweet spot to health for the brain that way. So it's kind of interesting. Lastly, I will say, someone had a question, what effect does screen time have on brain health? It's very negative. That's the short answer. Your brain is what you train it to be, right? That's the idea of remodeling. That's the idea of all these nerves making connections and rewiring all the time. So the brain you have right now is a brain that you created over decades, even to weeks, even to this morning's meal of what you ate, right? That's the brain you're living with right now. So what are we training our brain when we're watching the screen? What are we training it to do? Well, first of all, we're training it to be distracted because screen time typically involves tons of distraction. And, you know, it wasn't like this when I was a kid. It's interesting. I remember at some point I went to the gym and I looked at the TV. It's like, what changed about TV? Like, when did it become normal to look at a TV at the gym and literally have like 6 different things on the screen? The actual TV part's the small thing up here. And then you got, you know, the stock market, and then you got something over here and some breaking news over here and somebody something and some, you know, it's like, what happened? Back in the day, you know, this thing over here used to actually just be the TV screen, like it was one program, but now that's not good enough. Apparently it has to be 6 different multi-screens on this thing. You know, another example is advertisements or music videos. You know, if you watch any of these videos, like how long do you actually see one thing before they cut away in the editing? It's unbelievable. I don't know what the stat is. It's got to be like a second and a half. Maybe it's like, oh, cut to something else. Oh, different channel. Oh, different angle, different something. And it's like, oh, we got to engage the, you know, the person's attention, because our attention span's gotten so dismal that you have to keep shocking them with some new viewpoint, you know, or new loud sound every microsecond. It's terrible. So when you're dialing into the screen, you are training your brain in distraction, essentially. Think about something that would be the opposite of that. Think about chess, right? You're dialed into that chessboard. You're staring at that thing for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes at a time before you even make a single move. Now you're training your brain towards focus. You're training your brain towards deep thoughts. You're training your brain towards pondering outcomes and scenarios and possibilities. You're focused, right? Like, that's healthy brain behavior. Screen time is garbage brain behavior that will train you to be distracted. Not only that, it also tends to elevate levels of stress. So we know this. If you watch a lot of TV, watch a lot of news amongst adolescents, the higher the screen time, like the higher the stress levels, the higher the depression. It's very well known. And partly they do that because those advertisements, they want to keep eyeballs on the screen, right? So what draws attention? It's something salacious. It's something horrible. It's something titillating. It's something that's got to try to get you emotionally aroused so that your eyeballs keep staring at the screen. Because as long as your eyeballs are staring at the screen, they make money. If they're not, they don't. So they'll throw up anything they need to try to draw your attention there. But again, that often is very emotionally arousing in a negative way. So that's why I hate screen time. All right. This was great. This was really good. I'm going to send out a summary of this, and I'm going to look at how we can get the live recording done and sent out, maybe some link to my YouTube channel, something like that. Okay. And good to see you all. And there will be more wellness newsletters as well as more webinars in the future, so you can stay looking for that. And if you're interested in getting on the 6-month self-study program, there'll be an option to enroll in that as well when I send out the summary of this talk. Okay, I hope you're all doing well, and it was good to share some time. Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Turner.
Yep.